My background is I was from being a guy who was scared of heterosexual masculinity, who was literally beaten by heterosexual masculinity, to being a champion of heterosexual masculinity because heterosexual masculinity has changed that much.
Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Trauma, Training and Transformation. I'm Dr. James Alder, and today we're going to dive into a topic that sits at the heart of so many of my experiences, both as a coach and as a chartered psychologist. Episode 2 will look at masculinity, mental health, and sport, breaking the silence. In locker rooms, on training grounds, and even in classrooms, men are often told to be too strong or to keep together, never show weakness. But what happens when silence starts to hurt more than speaking up? So joining me today is someone whose work has shaped how we understand masculinity in sport, Dr. Eric Anderson. Eric's research has challenged stereotypes and opened doors for more inclusive, emotion, and honest forms of masculinity in athletes. Eric, is a real privilege to have you today. Welcome to the show. For those who don't know your background, could you start the show by just giving a bit of background about yourself and about your studies on masculinity in sport, please?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll take a bit of time here because I think it's important to understand the background of the researcher to understand the kind of research that I've engaged in and where I've come from. And, your listeners will obviously be keen to look for biases. And so having an idea of where I've come from will help them determine how much validity they want to put into what it is that I have to say.
Yeah, sure.
So I'm a researcher who came to the game quite late. I was a high school teacher, a high school cross-country coach. And in 1993, which was a much different period of time, it was a much more homophobic and hyper-masculine period of time, coming off of the 1980s, which was really, really hyper-masculine. In 1993, in a very conservative town, Huntington Beach, California, I came out of the closet as America's first openly gay high school coach. And the experience was just full of aggression, violence, physical and symbolic, against both myself and the athletes that I coached. And principally that aggression came from masculine athletes, football players particularly, and sort of the less masculine athletes you went down the list, the less harassment we received. But, even those at the bottom of the list, like other cross-country teams, still harassed us. So this experience, was truly shocking for me. I went from being a white, ostensibly heterosexual kid with privilege to all of a sudden being just a villain, just being absolutely a pariah in sport. And at the end of the 4 years of coaching at that high school, I mean, I coached it for 9, but after I came out, I coached for another 4. Attitudes have started to change. Things started to improve. And I started to coach collegiate runners a bit, but I still ran into problems there. Negative recruiting and things of that nature. So I decided that what I really wanted to do was become an academic to study the intersection of masculinity, sport, and gay men. So several years later, roll in PhD, I begin the process, and I conducted the first ever research on actual openly gay men in actual sports teams. Something that wasn't just theoretical or talking to closeted gay men or whatnot. These were actual gay men from actual sports teams. And I found 36 of them, and their experiences were okay. They're good. They weren't amazing necessarily. There's still a lot of heterosexism, but experiences were pretty good. Nobody's getting, harassed. Nobody was getting beat up. And that was a mind shift for me. I've always been one. I think that being gay as a kid in the 90s and the 70s was particularly helpful because it always gave me the ability to think adults can be wrong, that experts are wrong, because everybody I knew in the 90s was highly homophobic. Obviously started off with preachers, politicians, not my parents, but other kids' parents, and teachers, as well as your friends and your peers. Everybody hated gay people. And I always knew that the problem was with them, not with me. And so from a very early age, because I knew I was gay when I was probably 8, it gave me this ability to go, be leery what adults say. Only some of what they say is true. And so I've always been really critical and really open-minded to data in that capacity. So here I go off to do this PhD study, and what was half of my PhD? The other half was on male nurses, ex-Army vets in the nursing industry, which will probably feed into this as well. And that's not the experiences I was finding. And so it made me go, whoa, the data says that gay athletes were being treated just fine in high school, in American high schools and colleges, which is not what sort of the LGB, there was no T added to it back then, official organizations wanted to hear. Ironically, it made me a pariah. I mean, even today, the stigma in these organizations against me is still there. It's like, wait a minute. I actually was America's first openly gay high school coach, and I actually am the scholar with the most research ever on LGB athletes. And yet I'm some of a pariah because, well, I'm speaking the truth, which is things are going better. And so this experience made me go, well, wait a minute. If gay men are being tolerated, accepted by the most, and it went from tolerance to acceptance to banality. Today, it's just banality. Like nobody gives a crap. By the most masculine athletes, that must fundamentally mean that American masculinity has shifted. That this hyper macho pose of the 1980s that came with Schwarzenegger and Reagan and all of the hyper, and the Christian homophobia, which was extreme of the time, that it had shifted. And so I started studying heterosexual men. My first foray into this was military vets who served in, I forgot, you'll know what it is, the capacity of their sort of first aid in the military. They trained to be frontline personnel to address wounds. And then they retired from the military and they came out and found nursing was a great call for them to continue their passion to helping humanity. And I looked at the way military vets dealt with masculinity as nurses, and then found that they were these, amazingly caring guys who, were really cared about their patients. And there's all these stereotypes about male nurses that, female nurses were, let me sit down and hold your hand while, we do this procedure and talk to you about your feelings. Male nurses were just instrumental, sit, needles going in, that kind of thing. And that wasn't true. That these male nurses were fabulous with their patients, and that they were probably even more fabulous with male patients than female nurses, who I think had a bit of residency. I'm not sure, but male nurses were great. So that was my first piece of research that said, hey, look, these hyper macho heterosexual men are great people. And then that brought me to studying heterosexual men more fully. And I did this principally through sport because they are young heterosexual men. So I'm sort of capturing what's going on with youth at that time. And I've done it obviously for decades, following young, university heterosexual male athletes. And so I could see the shifts in time, but because these were also athletes, they were hyper masculine. They're supposed to be hyper masculine. They're more macho sports. A lot of my research is done with soccer players and American football players, so forth. And I showed that these myths and these stereotypes of heterosexual men being, emotionally vacant and violent and so forth, it wasn't true anymore. I showed that when there was a problem in a club, for example, the go-to wasn't, go take care of him. It was, he's not worth it, mate. And so I started to undo a lot of what the left has engendered themselves into, which is this view that men are hyper masculine and toxic. And my research in multiple terrains, we're talking 100 journal articles, multiple books on the topic. That is just not true. Now, we're going to get into this in a minute, but there does seem to be a sort of, with men, you sort of have it or you don't. It's kind of like you've made it or you're not. So we'll get into that in a minute. But my background is I went from being a guy who was scared of heterosexual masculinity, who was literally beaten by heterosexual masculinity, to being a champion of heterosexual masculinity, because heterosexual masculinity has changed that much. So today I've got all sorts of books and podcasts and videos and everything I can do to say, hey, look, straight men are absolutely wonderful. Fine. Not all of them, of course. There's always an asshole in the group, right? But it's the same with women too. So, no difference. Today, I'm the guy who's saying we need to stop lambasting men, calling them toxic. We need to stop saying that men have all of this privilege, because there's a lot of peril that goes with being a male as well. That gender equality is a two-way street, not a women have it all bad and men have it all good campaign. And particularly, we need to stop saying that, heterosexual athletes are highly homophobic because there's no gay men in football. There's no gay men in football because gay men don't care about football. That's why there's no gay men in football. So that's my background. And the part that's relevant today will probably be about the emotional intimacy that men can show for each other, something that's part of a bromance. And from there, we take it to you.
No, I mean, that's fascinating. Looking a bit about your academic background, but also your personal experiences being the first, collegiate cross-country coach. who's openly gay and having to deal with that from high school through to collegiate. It can't have been an easy experience, fighting your own battle in that respect. But I look back when we first met, we both come from very different backgrounds, different points of views. I was a military veteran, very staunched in the rugby community, and our first experience wasn't the typical lecturer / student, because we both had, different opinions about a very similar topic. But over time, we've grown into a really healthy, respectful relationship, based on many different factors. You being my PhD supervisor, who's helped me through that journey, but also on research papers. But more importantly, just on a personal level, you're right, that toxic masculinity tag isn't really accurate in all cases, or even fair in any case, because if you allow barriers to stay up, you'll never ever bridge that divide. And I feel like we are very much a contribution to breaking those barriers and becoming friends. And it's been a great experience for me personally.
Well, I think that's why you're really well positioned to do this, because, there's no doubt, we met, you were what we call a mature student, right? Sitting in a bunch of kids, and I literally hit you over the head with some pretty hard data about brain trauma in rugby, and my thesis that children have no business doing this because it leads to mental health issues and early death later in life. And you, of course, are a rugby coach, and so that sets us apart. But you came around, and you went from antithesis. You hated me. I mean, you absolutely hated me at the beginning.
Yeah.
And now here we are, mates. You did your PhD with me, and we're working together to hopefully help military vets with PTSD particularly, but other men and all men as well, to help promote men's lives. And so that's a testament to you that you're able to go, I don't like this guy, but I can't deny what he says, so I'm going to have to adjudicate here. Whereas most people go, to hell with him, and they brush him off as a wacko or whatever. You adjusted your attitude and you went, actually, I can't deny what the guy says, and therefore I shouldn't hold it against the guy. And then we became friends, and here we are.
Very much so. I had, it is, and that's probably another podcast all on its own. But it's part of just my own personal growth as a human being, but also being willing to listen to an alternative point of view and showing maturity to investigate instead of being blinkered in my own viewpoint. And that really takes me back to, from today to what it was then, looking at emotional integration, emotional impact of, the issues of gay athletes in sport, especially in the early years where the society was very anti-gay. So if you look at the insights from your early time and the echo today, why do you think even now silence around men's emotions is still quite high in sport? Especially, in fact, I'd say it's probably deeply ingrained in certain team sports or in society at large, just due to maybe upbringing, I guess.
So this brings us right into the question of heterosexual men, principally heterosexual men in sport, and their desire to emotionally relate to their teammates, right? To get on with their teammates, but also to be able to disclose emotions to their teammates. And I think that heterosexual men in this capacity are up against two layers of stigma. The first comes from the far left, which wants to view men as problematic always, unable to discuss your emotions always, right? So it's really more of a political campaign. We're going to use this stereotype that men don't emotionally relate, and we're going to use it against men. And then the second part is we're up against some genetics. Is that obviously men do have emotions and men do relate, but we also know that given the same trauma, men recover quicker with less therapy. So like in my psychological practice before I left the United Kingdom, I found that men were very much so my male clients wanted a fix. They wanted to, what can I do? Whereas female clients are much more inclined to just want to be heard. So men are doers, women are more thinkers. So genetically, men have, through evolutionary psych, have been sort of programmed to get over trauma earlier and easier. Now, that's not to say that all trauma, and that's, certainly with PTSD, it's a much more complex trauma, isn't it? But I mean, if, just I shouldn't call it trauma really, but, you have a bad interaction with somebody at a store. Man rants and raves, calls him an idiot, whatever. And then, He's over it. Where women take longer to get over it, process it longer. Women may avoid going back to that institution, that kind of thing. So the next thing we're up against is that whereas the far left is calling, actually, I didn't just say the far left, but really, there's this sort of media trope that, women want men to be more emotional, more emotionally expressive. That's actually not true. That isn't true. Women don't want, by and large, obviously, women don't want men to be emotionally vulnerable. They don't want that. They want men to be strong. They want men to take care of them. So it's because it's lip service. It's like, oh, men, they're so not in touch with their emotions. But when a man gets too expressive, women, it turns them off. They're like, ooh, no, I don't want to see that sort of weakness. So they are creating the problem. They are keeping the problem alive. Okay. The next thing is in sport. Look at the athletes in sport. There are two arenas. There's a front stage and a backstage. And the front stage, you're absolutely right. We don't want men to be emotional. And that is, you're literally in the war zone. You're on the pitch performing. The last thing you need for performance is, a guy fails, a guy misses a shot, whatever. The last thing you need is, for tears to start rolling down his face, right? It needs to be it's one of the things I love about football is they've come up with this, they've adopted this term of, oh, unlucky mate, unlucky mate, unlucky. Just brilliant, right? Because it says, hey, it wasn't you. You're not to blame. You're just unlucky. Get over it. Rather than, what the hell, you dropped the ball, you ruined it for the team, rather than a man, all of the negative emotions, just like, let's start off unlucky. So, in that terrain, there isn't a lot of time for longer processing of emotions and discussing. But what goes on behind the scene is what people don't readily see. It's what the media is unavailable to understand. And that is what I call a bromance. And let me explain to you what the bromance is. So you can understand that, the men do emotionally disclose. All right, so here we go. It used to be, go to like 1980s. All of the research from the 1980s, the 1990s, the 2000s, and even some scholars today, they say that women know they have a friend when they emotionally disclose to each other. And, often that's about drama, gossip. There's zero question that when men make friends, they're like, hey, let's get out and go do something. Let's get out and go kick the ball around. Let's get out and go bowling. Let's get out and go fit, whatever. Let's go do something together. Even if it's playing a video game, let's do something together. And so men knew that they had a friend when they did stuff together. And women knew that they had a friend when they related emotional vulnerability, secrets, gossip to each other.
Yeah.
And that hasn't changed. That hasn't changed. That's part of our psyche. That's part of the gender differences, and no socialization process in the world is going to change all that. That's deeply ingrained evolutionary psyche. Men are just doers, but that doesn't mean that that's where men's friendships end, at least not today, nor historically speaking. So if we go back to like the 1800s, we have amazing letters of emotional disclosure from male to male. Now, not as much as you would have got from female to female. But, George Washington wrote these letters of longing to one of his best friends in the Revolutionary War because, you don't put two generals on the same tent, obviously for obvious military reasons. Yeah. They write to each other. And, he wrote about how he longs for his friend. And all of this was perfectly acceptable because there was no idea of what it meant to be gay. I mean, think about this. Abraham Lincoln shared a bed with Joshua Speed, I forgot. Somebody Speed. For 7 years, a bed, not a bedroom, a bed. There was no concept of what I call homohysteria. Oh my God, you shared a bed with another man. You must be gay, and then we're going to hate you. So men were able to have all of this emotional disclosure. And then it all went away. As the awareness of homosexuality grew throughout the course of the 20th century, it went away. And its apex of going away was 1986 to 1988. That's where it hit the top. And then it started to come back. So now this is all about how we view homosexuality. So back then, we hated gays, and therefore these men, but we did. So in Abraham Lincoln's time, we hated gays, but we didn't really know they existed in our family. It was like, we didn't really think that was a thing. So they were able to do this. But the 1990s, we all knew gay people existed, and they could be in your family, your church, your community. And we hated them. So men had to shut down. They couldn't emote. They couldn't love. They couldn't write letters of love longing. But today, we all know gay men exist everywhere, right? We all have gay friends. we're fine with it. So there isn't homophobia. So heterosexual men are now able again to have a form of disclosure. So that brings me to the bromance, which is a pretty new invention. I'd say probably last 20 years, really, it started. And it started with team sport athletes, which is amazing. These guys who are supposed to be the paragon of being silenced, it starts with them. And it starts off with they do things together. They play video games, they play football, whatever, and they've got a friend. But as that relationship grows closer and they emotionally disclose to each other their vulnerabilities, their depression, their angers, their sadnesses, whatever, temporary and long-term, right? Then that's how they know they're in a bromance, because they're safe enough to relate to each other. So when men are lucky enough to enter into a bromance, and I can't tell you what percentage of men are in a bromance, but when men are lucky enough to enter into a bromance, which is facilitated by sport, because that's where men congregate, play together, get to know each other, spend long periods of time together, then they do have this ability to say anything to their brother, when they call them bros, without stigma. And they do relate very, very well to each other. For the men who don't make it into the bromance, they find themselves increasingly isolated. So this is an all or nothing phenomena with, I'm just going to go with university male students. More likely that you're going to be able to express vulnerability if you're in a bromance by far than if you're not. And we get to just walk up to some guy, just your friend, and just start unloading on them. They don't want that. And actually, so what we're finding now is what we really need to talk about when we talk about mental health and lack of sharing is we need to stop. It's not about the team sport athletes. It's about the gamers.
Yeah.
It's about the teen boys who are in their room doing this all day long, talking to their friends on headphones. Those conversations are not rich with emotions. Those conversations are do, right? Yelling at each other, not in a mean way, but, oh, why didn't you get that goblin or, whatever. And they're spending lots of time together in a cyber world, but so many of them just don't have friendships outside of that cyber world. And so many of them who even do have friendships outside of that cyber world are still stuck in the land of do. So I want to, just throw out there that this is not a problem of team sport athletes. This is a problem of all men, and team sport athletes are in an opportunity where they have the possibilities of making bromances, which is something that other men aren't as easily capable of doing unless they're structured to spend lots of time around each other through work or something of that nature. So it's a very complicated terrain of some are rich with it, like, yes, they've got it. And some of them are just suffering in loneliness and sadness and depression.
So interestingly from that is some people in male dominated sports may be lacking that social connection due to the environment that they're creating or involved with. But it seems to be a conflict between society and sport, and that, around the term of masculinity. What does it really mean? So from your perspective then, do you think the attitude towards masculinity in sport has changed? Because you quite really said there about it's not really in team sports that you see these issues. It's more of a society at large. Do you think that's because we generally have moved forward, or there's been a change in the language around the same problem?
Oh, I think we've moved forward with dramatic speed. And I guess, I'm an odd one, right? Because, in some ways I just hate team sport, like not cross country or, baseball or whatever, but the ones where the kids collapse their heads or their bodies and cause brain sports, right? Brain trauma, lifelong problems with their brains. So, in that capacity, I view these sports as vessels to destroy mostly men's brains. And I literally call, sports like soccer and rugby or a war on men's brains. And nobody cares because they want to be entertained, right? But on the other hand, I get so tired of hearing this anti-jock mentality that, team sport athletes are just lacking in so many ways, and they're stupid, and they're hyper macho, and it's like, oh my God, the stereotypes against them are horrific. So when we look at men's sports in particular, there is no question that professional sport used to treat men like commodities. Yeah, and they still are commodities, obviously, in and out, right? That's why we've got a bench full of people who are willing to play. So if you don't follow the rules, or you get too emotional, or you break down and cry, as Tom Hanks says, there's no crying in baseball. You're off. Next one's in, right? It's a factory. It's a factory for the type of entertainment that brings in big bucks through both fandom and sports attendance. But sports teams have garnished a great deal of stigma for not taking care of the mental side of their athletes as well in the last few decades. And there's a character by the name of Freddie Flintoff, who I'm sure you'll know, but not all viewers will know, from this really sort of bizarre sport where they stand around doing nothing for 5 days, hoping it doesn't rain. They call it cricket because that's the only thing you can hear is crickets going off in the background, because the sport is just so damn boring. But at any rate, there was this character, Freddie Flintoff. He was this hyper macho guy and cigar smoking, And, well, he came out publicly. I think it was on BBC, with his major mental health issues. And for me, that was a catalyst in the UK, at least. It's like, whoa. And so we started to see much more care and attention paid to athletes in process. And I think that the farther down you go on that train, from professional sport all the way down to youth sport, the more care and attention there is, because it's not a commodity, right? The professional level is still somewhat of a commodity. But even at the professional level of sport, we've seen policies introduced to, give athletes the ability to emote more. We've seen more aftercare for athletes. A long ways to go in the professional world. But at the lower levels of sport, it's not stigmatized for men to express their vulnerabilities, their emotions that don't align with, quote, masculinity outside of the immediate first front stage. Backstage, all good. Game's over, drinking your beer, having a talk, going out with your mates, getting upset, telling them what's on your mind, whatever, girlfriend calls, life problems, whatever, all good. In front stage, in that moment, now's not the time for it. We got 90 minutes to play the sport here. So again, it is there and it is growing. And I hate to say it again, but sport gets credit. Sport gets a lot of credit for this, for bringing men together and giving them the ability to emote together. And then as those masculine men do that, it gives permission for less masculine men to also do that and not be called wimps or fags or whatever. And this is not the first time sport has led the way. Sport led the way. Football in the United Kingdom led the way for the feminization, not total feminization, I should say the demasculinization of men's attires. These guys would wear skinny jeans back in 2005, 2007. These football players would spend more, you could tell I have a hair crop. These guys would spend more time in the mirror fixing their hair than women before a night out. And then they'd wear skinny jeans and and they look, it was a much more feminist style of dress. And that then spread to the general population. While that trend is now gone, it lasted for 7 years. Guys wearing just really, sort of feminized clothing stuff. Sport also gets credit for allowing straight men to kiss each other. You guys would go after a goal, they would kiss, and then they bring it into the clubs where particularly football players aren't marked by, you rugby lads. You can spot a rugby lad from a mile away because, they're tall and buff, right? Football players, when you take them, or soccer players for the Americans, when you take them out of context off that pitch, you put them in a bar when they're, they're clothed normally. You can't tell they're soccer players because they're thin. They don't, they're athletic, but they don't look demonstrably different. And so then you have these swarms of guys kissing each other in bars, and then that spread. And my research showed across the United Kingdom, heterosexual men were sealing their friendships with kisses in bars and clubs in their own private spaces in mass. And that was not only across the United Kingdom, it was also happening in the United States. So sport gets credit for allowing men to dress differently. Sport gets credit for allowing heterosexual men to seal their for each other with a kiss. It wasn't sexual kisses. It was, kind of thing. And now here sport gets credit again for creating an atmosphere in which off the pitch, men could have these amazing friendships and this emotional disclosure. Now, my university several years ago, they wanted to run a campaign for men to say, men do talk about their problems. It was really quite a clever campaign. I forgot what it was called. It was a number of years ago now. And they featured these men talking about their mental health issues. Now, when I say mental health issues, today we've all sort of jumped to this idea that it means somebody got clinical depression. That's not what I'm on about. But, men who've had emotional problems. We all do, right? And I was overjoyed to see all of these men, and they sort of put out a call, who would like to be videotaped for this film. And half of them were team sport athletes. I know because, all my students were team sport athletes. And I was like, I know that one, I know that one. And I was overjoyed, right? That their relationships in sport and their position as athletes, which still has capital. People still love athletes. Gave them the opportunity to go out there and spread the message that, hey guys, it's okay to cry. Oh, that's what it was. It's okay for men to cry. And they all talked about times that they cried. And I was like, I love it. I absolutely love it. These men talking about times that they cried. And again, so sport gets some credit here. Sure, sport has a ways to go, I guess, right? Sure, we could always do better. But I hate to say it, sport gets credit. And, more power to you sportsmen for helping make this an acceptable terrain.
Yeah. But like sport in itself has evolved really with the acceptance of emotional release. So I think a lot of high profile soccer and football players in the UK and Freddie Flintoff, the cricketer, been open about the mental health issues. And some of that's been because of the high expectations of being a pro elite athlete to being part of a team sport and then losing that identity as they come to retirement through injury or over purpose. But also within team sports, even in the military, you're expected to be tough and ready to go, and any sign of weaknesses is not accepted. So I guess, the stigma around that can be quite off-putting for a younger athlete into a strong team. And that could have its own traumatic impact on that individual athlete, going forward. So it's now, it is very good that we're having open discussions going forward, be it rugby, soccer, American football, whatever sport it is, people are having the confidence to seek the help that they need. People listening to this podcast probably might not be aware that you can pass some experience, but you've written a lot about inclusive masculinities. So for listeners who are listening to that concept, what does that actually mean? And how does it challenge the traditional tougher version of masculinity, as you've just really adhered to the front office and the back office approach to, open emotional, I guess, vulnerability would probably be a right word.
Yeah, so let me give you the nutshell answer. I think it'd be easier for viewers who aren't academics and aren't steeped in this sort of literature. Is inclusive masculinities are the opposite of what toxic masculinity is thought to be. Now, toxic masculinity, it's a term that really just pisses me off. I think it's just an anti-male term, full stop. And if you ask people, well, what is toxic masculinity? They'll say, I don't know, say hyper-aggressive. I'll say, okay, so there's a word for that. It's called hyper-aggressive. And they'll say, oh, whatever. Too competitive. Okay, there's a word for that. It's called hyper-competitive, right? Narcissistic. Okay, there's a word for that. Why do you have to lump all these things into male? So it's just an anti-male trope. And I think it's on par with racist, homophobic slurs. It's like the word toxic masculinity to me is just a slur. So inclusive masculinity was actually around, and the concept was around years before this concept of toxic masculinity came out. When I first started studying masculinity, there was a leading theory about masculinity called hegemonic masculinity. Big word, don't need to know what it stands for. But basically, and it was entirely true. I mean, I think it was fashion at a time. It was entirely true. And it was fashion in the 90s. And it was basically this, that there are men on top, and they are white, heterosexual, Protestant, good-looking, buff, team sport athletes, and that they rule the roost. And then there's all these different stratifications of men, obviously towards the bottom. It's like a pyramid, right? Below them. And that this was a class system, and that those on the bottom, instead of going, or those in the middle, instead of going, to hell with the whole system, the whole thing is ridiculous. Everybody looked up. Everybody wanted to be like that. And there's truth to that. People did look up because they had popularity, they had the girls, they had the muscles, they had the good looks, they had all of that, right? So instead of saying, hey, kings, right? I call it a king of the hill style competition. Instead of saying, we don't need any kings, everybody looked up to that, and everybody tried to sort of achieve that level of machiness. And with that came all of these things that you would you would modernly call toxic, the sort of hyper masculinity, the roughness and this and that. The Space Shuttle Challenger is a great example of this at play, even amongst a bunch of nerdy scientists. But when it blew up, the lonely guys down on the bottom were saying, the engineers, their glasses, were saying, these O-rings can't handle this. Like, the temperature's too cold. Like, no, this is too great a risk. And forgot what he's called, but the coach stood up and was like, and he literally said, "Are we not men here? Like, dude, you're launching a rocket. You're not launching a ball into the air." And so he sort of used hypermasculinity up that pyramid. Everybody didn't want to contest the top, and the damn thing blew up. And that was a sign of the times. Whereas today, that doesn't exist. So my research started to show in 2005, I coined the term in 2009, was to say that that pyramid has done this. It's created a bunch of different ways of being male without the stratification. So they're all on a horizontal plane. And in extensive research on this among students, we showed that if you go to a typical, and this was mostly done in Britain, but also in America, and dozens and whatever, 100 other researchers picked it up and did research on this in many other capacities, was if you went to an American high school, like the one I coach at today, there's football players, but they don't have any special status. People aren't going, oh God, I want to be them. And then you got your band players, and band players and football players are friends. And then you got your drama people, and then you got your computer geeks, and then you got your easy, and they're all sort of horizontal. And so what it's done is it's given men much more opportunity to be masculine in a multitude of ways without hierarchy or stigma. So from that, the reason for that was decreasing homophobia, because it used to be that when men stepped out of line and they showed emotional vulnerability, fine. Your friend was sad, fine. Your friend was sad, so you gave him a hug. Fag. Oh, you wore skinny jeans. Fag. Oh, you wanted to be a nurse. Fag. And so this fag discourse, this homophobia, kept all these men in this pyramid wanting to be anything but gay, wanting to be as opposite of gay as they possibly could. But as homosexuality became increasingly accepted, then that whole pyramid started to shatter, and we have now these horizontal stratifications. Now, that's not to say there might not be some school where the American football players are still revered a bit more than someone else, but it isn't this hegemony at play. You don't have, the cross-country runners at my school, my kids' school, whatever, they don't want to be football players. They're not looking up to football players going, oh God, I just want to be like them. And at the same time, those football players aren't bullying kids who aren't football players. Bullying is just not acceptable. And if there's an openly gay kid on any team, nobody cares. It's the whole thing has flipped. So the term inclusive masculinity comes from what was once exclusive to masculinity. So what was the linchpin behind all of this horrible masculinity in the 80s, this Schwarzenegger, no girly men crap. And by the way, I really hate Arnold Schwarzenegger. I really hate that guy. Took one of my marriages away as well. Right. And he's just, oh God, I hate that guy. Dude. Use your brain, not your muscles. At any rate, this Schwarzenegger style homophobia of the 1980s, it was exclusive to homosexuality. And that's what kept the whole pyramid in play. Nobody wanted to step outside because they would literally get beaten up. And so everybody had to act in this hyper macho way. And then as homosexuality became accepted, and today it's just banal, like nobody cares, then the whole thing fell. And so I call it inclusive masculinity, because masculinity today, heterosexual masculinity today, is now inclusive of what it was once exclusive of, homosexuality. And today, I have done so much research on this. Like, I'll give you an example. When I first moved to the UK in 2005, when rugby players are amongst the best for this. Like, rugby players were amazing at accepting gay people and at loving each other and celebrating each other. And I'm going to just give you an example. I just moved to England, and we're going up a hill on one of these long, bendy buses to Bath University, because it sits on top of the hill. And I was sitting in the bus. I'd only been teaching there for like 2 weeks. And all these rugby players were singing these songs. I call them jodies, I guess, in America, but in the military, but I don't know what they are. But they're these songs, and there's one of them was, wow, man, the words were really disgustingly homophobic. Like, I was appalled. But I'm also not a puss. So I stood up and I walked into the center of all these rugby players. They're all standing on the bus doing this chant. And I said something to the guys like, dude, not fucking cool, that kind of thing. And he said, oh, are you gay? And I said, yeah. And I was, waiting for the onslaught. And he goes, we love gay men. And I'm 38 at the time, right? I'm an old dude. And he's 19. He reaches out, grabs me, and kisses me. And I was just like, what have I walked into here? And so what that was a vestige of the old school. The language was still there, but they didn't mean it. It's like Christmas, and we all celebrate it, but we don't believe in Christ, right? Well, at least in England, America are all so crazy for it. But, It's like, it's a vestige. And so that to me is a perfect example of this unraveling of this system. And so that rugby team had become inclusive of gay men, and that made them accepting of me. And then because they were inclusive of gay men and accepting of me, they didn't have to reach those heights of masculinity. And then therefore they could emote to each other and dress better and go into feminized occupations and sort of whatever they want in that capacity. So that's what inclusive masculinity is. It's to say, that's a new theory that says, men aren't this horrible stuff, and men have freedom today to do whatever they want, to listen to whatever music they want, play whatever sports they want, enjoy whatever entertainment they want. And, like I'm taking college classes again because why not, right? And I'm seeing all these students, because I've just retired recently, and I'm seeing all these students walking around with these male students. I'm like, what are you? And I love it. Like a kid in my class, he's got a skateboard. Okay. So that's typically sort of like a masculine thing, kind of like a countercultural, right? And he's got the baggy pants on like a skateboarder, green hair. And he's got all these, they call them the boo-boos. Don't get me going on that. Got all these little stuffed animals hanging off his backpack. And I'm just like, what the hell is that? I mean, in the 1980s, that would have been meat for the football team to destroy. And today he's just like, it's this weird fusion of masculinity and femininity and all that. So, I give heterosexual men so much credit today, and it really all stems from team sport athletes.
No, I appreciate that, Eric. And that's a very powerful message, especially with your research that you've covered quite extensive in this topic. But I think in certain team sports, generationally, you still have players who are quite insular in a sense where emotions aren't easy to display, especially being vulnerable in a team sport where you feel under pressure to deal with emotions internally. So what physical and psychological impact do you think that could have on a player, performance, identity, or even relationship management, really? How do they cope with that?
Yeah, these kinds of questions get tougher when you're up against institutional barriers and boundaries. So the vast 99.99% of team sport athletes are not professional athletes, right? They're not. So at the professional level, which is the one we all take our marching orders from, or we all look to, that's big $1 billion business in some sports, $100,000 business in your failing sport of rugby. But you can smile, James. I just made fun of you in your sport.
Just letting you have the moment, mate.
I gotta have my dig at rugby. You know me. So, like in soccer, football, $1 billion sport. That's a different story. And I do hear, and I still hear from people saying in certain contexts, the military, intelligence areas, like if I disclose my emotional difficulties, I'm out. I'm going to lose my job. I'm going to be monitored and be told like, can no longer do this, you do that. So, that sort of thing still exists. And in team sports where you're not a center of the team, you're a peripheral player, right? And you're just trying to get off the bench and onto the field. Yeah. I mean, the reality is your coach might be as wonderful and as emotionally available as the best example of a coach we've ever had, Ted Lasso. But yeah, right. Because even Ted Lasso is going to go, if I got these two players to choose from, and this one's always going on about his problems, and this one's not, you're going to choose the one who's not, because it's the end of the day, you still need to win. And so it isn't a perfect panacea of men's emotional availability. I'm not trying to say that it is. I'm trying to say that the spark has begun, and it's taken up some pretty good chunk of the forest. But there's still a big wide forest to go. I don't have easy solutions for these things. But yeah, still expressing sort of that vulnerability, the doubt, the fear in many sports for many men in many positions can be challenging. May not be the most accepting environment for that. So it's this thing of two worlds. Like you have to have it good enough and then you get it all. Don't have it good enough, you may not get any of it. So to speak to your question of what sort of pressures are still out there, when you are a professional or even a semi-professional team sport athlete and you're thinking your career is going to be based on that, there's a lot of pressure. Yeah. There's a lot of pressure. You got to perform every day. You've got to look right every day. You are also, the higher you get, the more media attention you have about you. So you do or say anything wrong, and now you're going to have a BBC article slapped on you. So there's a lot of professional pressure in that capacity. And if weakness of mind is considered, it being upset, depressed, vulnerable, afraid is considered a weakness of mind by the coach, And particularly if that coach is from the older generation who isn't down with all of the sort of lovey-doveyness of the younger generation, yeah, you're still a barrier there. And
Yeah.
because professional sport pulls from its own ranks, that nobody says, hey, dude, you're a professor of sports psychology and you've done all this research and you really know how to, let them take it on my own. Ted Lasso would never actually be hired. He's the kind of coach we all need. And that's kind of coach that M's going to hire. And so, sport is incestuous in that capacity. And it's easy to reproduce hypermasculine people. Those who are hypermasculine and do the best then get hired to go on to be the coach, right? They don't care to hire coaches. They don't care about your bachelor's degrees and your master's degrees and your
Yeah.
PhDs. They don't care about that. They care about your winning record. And the only way coaches get promoted is through a winning record. And, and I'm not going to harp on any particular professional team, but, no one's going to go, we surveyed your athletes and your athletes said that you were emotionally available to them. You supported them intellectually, supported them emotionally, you motivated their careers. You helped them off the pitch and on the pitch. Your athletes love being on the pitch there. You protected them from injury. You are the greatest Ted Lasso kind of character ever. They don't even survey that stuff. There's only one survey they give. What is your win-loss record? And that system influences coaches to care less about their athletes than they otherwise would have. Now, I'm not saying coaches don't care about their athletes, but I'm saying that less than they otherwise would have. And it's a system ripe for abuse. And it's just easier to go, you're out, you're in. And I'll give an example of this. One of my high school runners went off to run for one of the most famous American cross-country distance running coaches, collegiate level, outstanding program year after year. And he got there to find out that as a freshman, he was not allowed to talk to the head coach. Like you do not get to speak to the head coach at all. Because what that head coach would do is he would hire through scholarship, like however many, like 5 of the best runners he could find in America, 5 per year. You only need 5 to score on a team. So you got 5 per year and they're there for 5 years. So you got, because American colleges take 4 years and they can redshirt and they do a 5th year. So you got 25 outstanding runners, only 5 score. So you only need 1 out of 5 to survive. So he'd bring these kids in who have wide-eyed ideas about being a great distance runner, and he would up their mileage dramatically, total physical abuse on their bodies to make a break system. Some would survive, some wouldn't. And then he didn't want to get to know him. You don't have to deal with the emotional fodder of, I really like this kid, we were close and, and he's hurt, but maybe I should keep him on, or maybe I should keep a scholarship going, or, make it special. No, he was like cannon fodder. He's like Russian army, like cannon fodder. Going to run a shitload of miles. If you survive, great. You're going to be an amazing distance runner. And then next year you can speak to me. And so he is influenced by the system that only cares about victories. And the higher you go in sport, that is all we really care about is victories. And the only reason these professional sport organizations are paying attention to their athletes' mental health is because of lawsuits. That's what it really comes down to. It's lawsuits. They're afraid of lawsuits. They're afraid of being sued. And so, now they have to have these representatives and they got to make these motions if they really care, et cetera. So it's a complex terrain in that field of it's a mixtures of goods and bads, but we're up against some institutional structures that are never going away.
No, because the culture about sport is like that, right? So it's about in the UK, whatever pro football successful at this moment in time. In America, you've got athletes there with Tom Brady, LeBron James. They're the pinnacle of where people want to be. Unfortunately, they're competing against millions of people trying to do the same thing, and it can rather be, as you said, make you or break you. The toughness and the silence exposed and experienced by athletes, who don't make it. Really, it is a challenge, really, in a cultural sense, because if they don't make it, have they failed? That's
absolutely true. Absolutely true. Rick. Sport can give it, and sport can take it away. I just used 2 weeks ago, one of the runners that I coach. He didn't have what he thought would be greatest race, and that is produced by sport, right? He ran 10 seconds slower in a 3 mile than he wanted to. So he was depressed about it. So it took it away. And then he's got all these teammates to say, oh man, it's okay. We love you. Come on. And then the whole next week that they were running with him. And then the next race, one of the fast ones slowed down to push him further. Amazing, right? He sacrificed. One of his teammates sacrificed his placing, his time to push one of his athletes. So, friendship is great when you're giving something that means nothing to you. But when you sacrifice for the sake of a friend, that's love. That's not just
Yeah.
friendship, that's love. And
Yeah.
so, his friend, sacrificed from to push him. So sport gave to him in that amazing capacity through the love of his teammates. But then sport also, the structure and institution of it made him depressed because he had to make the 10 seconds faster. So you're absolutely right. The structure of sport produces much of the culture. And the structure of sport is failure. Almost everybody is going to fail now. And so you get all these kids who want to be professional athletes in, particularly in soccer across the globe, right? Football is the most popular one. And they all think they're going to make it. And adults are idiots. And they say to kids shit like, anything you can conceive and believe you can achieve. Bunch of bullshit, It's all about genetic talent. It's all about that. And then hard work. And then being discovered, right? It's not about just, I want to, yes. Yeah, James, do you think I could be a great rugby player at my size? I want to be a
There's always
sumo.
time, man. Always time.
Yeah, always time. My goal is to be a world-class sumo wrestler, So
You're right. You put the hard work in and put some weight on, you never know.
exactly. And that's the bullshit that we feed to kids, right? Like, just keep following.
But is that a cultural thing, or is that just, an evolution of thought? Because your research highlights this a lot, where the cultural shifts have been in relation to the understanding of emotional expressiveness in sport and being men and so on. But if you look at, what do you think coaches need to do? I mean, I still coach university players, and they're all incredibly gritted student athletes. But I've had to learn and adapt to be more emotionally accepting, so then I can provide an environment that's both nurturing as a player, but also as a human being. So what do you think coaches and leaders can do to create that emotional environment, that safety net, so the players can be that a human being before they become competitive athletes? Especially younger athletes.
Yes. So first of all, you get my praise. I've often praised you for the journey you made. Your masculinity was growing in the same atmosphere mine was, because we're near the same age. I'm a bit older, but whatever, You grew up with all that homo hysteria, all the homophobia. You were in a hyper-masculine terrain. It's called war. And yet, you've come out the other side and you've learned and grown. And now here you are. Your whole life mission is to make yourself emotionally, to be there for, other athletes and for vets. So, fantastic. And that is because you have followed the number one rule. And this is the only real rule that coaches need to know. And it's this: it's not about you. This team, it's not about you. Put your damn ego to the side. It's about the kids. And we often say that sport is an avenue in which we build character and people and this and that. Right. If it is going to be that, then coach, it's about your players, not about you. And it's not about your wins and losses. It's about the way you treat your players. Do you treat them like Ted Lasso, or do you treat them like a commodity? Are you a Russian general just sending them in, no care for them at all? Or are you Ted Lasso? And it is all about that. And in my experience as a coach, right? And I love to do research on this. I wish I could find a PhD student to do research on this. My view is, when you treat your athletes like it's all about them, they're going to perform better anyhow, and you're going to win more anyhow. And I think that was one of the messages of Ted Lasso as well. I think there's truth to that. I can't empirically say it's true, but I believe it is. So the number one thing we really could do is say it's all about the kids or the teams or whoever. It's about them. And coach, you're paid to facilitate a culture to make their lives better. Not just to make them better at their sport, because I'm sorry, being good at rugby, being good at my sport, running, it will do nothing for you in life. Nothing. You are not going to go on to be a professional rugby player. And even if you do, that's a very short-term gain for a lot of mental distress, pain, and early death because of chronic traumatic encephalopathy. And in my sport, distance running, it's going to do nothing for you in life. You're never going to be a world-class runner. And if you're one of the 0.00000%, it's a very short-term game. You're not going to make a lot of money. And then you're going to end up working at, McDonald's eventually anyhow, unless you somehow transition it. It's not about being a professional athlete. That's what we need to stop. It's not about winning. It's all about the fact that when you get a bunch of guys together and you give them something to do together, magic can happen. And
Yeah.
that's where the love comes. That's where the bromances are. And if you take the pressure off of winning and you make it about the athletes, then you will facilitate more love for each other, more teamwork, more joy in sport that they play, and more bromances. And then you as a coach, then you might actually do something that's commendable, because I don't give a flying rat's ass if you win the Southwest District quarter semifinal championships and you've got that trophy on your shelf, which not even your kids are going to care about someday. They don't. My kids, no kids care about their parents' trophies. Who cares? These victories that you think are so big in the moment, who cares? Nobody cares outside your little teeny arena, you know? And then the people who do care, they're just angry at you because they think you had some unfair advantages why you won and they didn't. Completely non-important. But you as a coach, pull that Ted Lasso style of coaching out and put the center of the athlete first over victory. And you make yourself emotionally available to them and to hear them. You might save a life. Now,
but is that organic enough in all coaching environments? You know, all coaches are different, they're designed different, they deliver different, and not all, you know, not one size fits all, so to speak. You know, in a young athlete's life, you know, they still look at, you know, awards being important to them. It's still driven that way, especially in team sports. You know, you can still be the man, you know, the player of the match, but you're still in a team, the team that wins, so to speak. So there's still that individual award. So I just coaches not overcome that, but create an environment that it's for all. And, you know, rugby or all contact sports really have come a long way in relation to recognizing stuff like head contact, concussion, but we're still slow to, you know, the game in relation to mental health. You know, we're now openly talking about mental health, but it's still nowhere near where it should be. And, you know, we still have terms like man up and get, you know, I see that still in rugby. The military is still like that. And I can see why to some degree. But in a young athlete's life or a young soldier's life, they need to know that they've got a future in that sport. And sometimes they can feel that can, you know, be a barrier to them moving forward.
Well, and so we're back to the structure of the sport creates the culture. And the structure is designed upon failure. It's designed to fail everybody out and find the few seeds to make it, right, to matriculate out. The younger you are, the more failure there is. I'm start off with whatever in England, go with whatever, I'm just making this up. 5 million kids thinking they're going to be professional players. And then by the time they get to university, they're down to whatever, 500,000. And then, you know, you get your semi-pro clubs to maybe have whatever, 100,000. By the time you get to premier level, then what? There's 30 guys on 30 teams or something, like whatever. Great, 500. Yeah. Huge numbers. So that structure is going to create that environment to some degree. And that's not going to go away. As I said before, the higher you go to sport, the less of a Ted Lasso they want, because it's a capitalist venture. And so there isn't a whole lot we're going to do. What we can do. So when you say like they need to know that there's a future for them in the sport, my view is they need to know that their time in sport is very short.
Yeah.
That there is no future for them in that sport. That they should enjoy it for the now, stay as healthy as they can in it, make some good friends, but there is no future for you. There may be a future for you in the exercise. My sport, yeah, you can run hopefully for the rest of your life. But in your sport, how many guys are 55 years old tackling other guys in rugby? Like, you know, the percentages less and less all the time, right?
Yeah.
There is no future for you in rugby. So it's about keeping your eye on the future, which is to say, I always tell my high school runners, don't run in college. It's just too competitive. It's too much. It's too go to college to get a degree and get a good job. And so there isn't a future. And that's what we need to change is we don't want kids if they've got a future in sport. And we want coaches to realize that those kids are dealing with, they're not there to make athletes. They're there to make better men, better boys and men. And if they put that as their number one venture to make better boys and men, like, you know, girls and women, but that's a different topic, then they may have on their shelf a medal that they'll never see. Some kid that they inspired to open up about his emotional issues and that then saved his life. Yeah. And they'll never see that medal or that trophy. Maybe it'll be lucky. The kid will come back someday and say, thank you. But that's what we need to remember is that the gains that you are making, the awards you're getting as a coach are long-term and mostly unseen. It's kind of like kindergarten teachers. They have so much impact on your life, but most of us don't remember who our reception year teacher was.
Yeah.
And but they are true unsung heroes. And that's what coaches need to be, instead of putting their own ego first and their own victories first. But we're up against that structure, and the higher you go into sport, the less they're going to care about you. And that's
Yeah,
just,
yeah.
that's just
No,
business
and
sense.
that's understandable. You mentioned there about, players 50 and above. You still see a lot of vets teams in clubs. Yes, the challenge then is people get too old to play, but the reason they still want to play is because of that team and identity, and that being part of that, and feeling, a trust with that group of people. Earlier on you talked about emotional authenticity, about how you're real about your emotions, and how you speak openly in that group, be the bromance, or even just, competing against that toxic masculinity in society. But people still have to face that time where they're vulnerable, and just actually having a strength in masculinity weaken that ability to be vulnerable, or does it make it easier? That shouldn't weaken us, shouldn't it? It should allow us then to be true to
Yeah.
ourselves.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that this parade is being led by some famous team sport athletes, right? And of course, I can't remember them all right now because I'm not a fan of professional team sports. I don't watch it, but there's more discourse around this, even for women, like Simone Biles. She pulled out of a big competition because, yeah, mentally wasn't there. You hear, British legend. I know he's revered Britain. I should know his name because he's gay. He's a diver. Tom Daley, right? Tom Daley?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Right. He's like, oh, I knit for my mental health and all this. And so we do have an increasing percentage of visibility of professional athletes, to be honest. And I think that's fantastic and that helps. I think the number one thing we can do is we need coaches to remember that it's not about them, it's about the kids. And the two thing we can do is stop land-basing men for not saying, oh man, you never show your emotions. Land-basing people for smoking doesn't stop them from smoking, right? You need a different approach. And so I think we need to stop bashing men, and then we need to start treating coaches need to treat their athletes like they're humans instead of just commodities to perform well. All the while, remember, we are never, ever going to get men as a whole to be as emotional as women as a whole. That is not going to happen. That's not within our evolutionary biology. That's not the question, and that's not the goal. I don't want men to show love the way women show love. Women show love through writing letters of fantasy and, flowers and whatever. Men show love by doing something for you. So like a woman will show love by, I don't know, putting in her husband's lunchbox, if there was still such a thing. Oh, darling, I hope you have a wonderful day. I really love you. Hearts and kisses, right? That's great. Wonderful. It's showing your love. Men show their love because they come home and they see that her tire is low. And so they take her car to the garage, they fill the tire up, and they bring it back. And they don't make a big shell out of it, right? That's how men show love, by doing stuff for each other. And so I don't want men to have to be copies of what women are. I don't think women are the paragon of perfect beings that men need to emulate. We just need a bit more balance. And men have been moving in more towards the center, and women have been moving in more towards the center. And that's a very good thing. So we just need to keep that going, promote that. Having images of team sport athletes talking about their mental health issues is wonderful. Coaches treating their players like players is the way to go. And then the big one is we just need to stop land-basing men, because when men are land-based, they do this.
Yeah.
Right. And so we need to stop land-basing heterosexual men. I think that's,
Yeah. So from my side, from my side, I've seen, as a physical training instructor in the army, set expectations, and the expectations set from the job, there is no sign. There is no allowance of weakness. You need to drive from the front and push from the rear. And that's all about being a strong individual, regardless if you're male or female in the military. It's the job sets the standard, really. And then
yes.
in episode 1, I talk about my journey from the combat field to CrossFit. I've seen it in CrossFit athletes and rugby players. You talked before about that emotional turmoil, but it's about identity, what you see yourself as being, what you're connected to, that building that sense of identity is what helped me, especially in my darkest times with PTSD. And even though I was still suffering, it's CrossFit gave me back something I completely lost, especially trying to recover from trauma. We see team sports, but sports in general, do we see these using sport as a functional tool for recovery? especially
Yes.
evolutionary
Yes.
and
Thank
growth.
you. Yeah, let me highlight that. We have this false belief that when you have mental distress, we'll just call it, right? Some issues. Again, I'm not talking like bipolar or formally diagnosed thing that that medication would be beneficial for, like schizophrenia. But you have issues in your life. The way our society views that for dealing with that, the health requisite that they think you know is best for that is a feminized version of love. It's a feminized version, which is you need to go to a therapist, you need to talk, and you need to talk it out. It's talking therapy. You need to talk it out, right? And that is beneficial and empirically validated. Like there's no question that that absolutely helps. But the one thing that we're not showing, and like you go to GP for depression and they throw drugs at you that don't even work, which are antidepressants. They take 6 weeks to go into effect. By that time, most people's depression's gone anyhow, and they go, look, the drugs work. They didn't, right? 6 weeks for it. And they're highly addictive. You got to come off incredibly slowly. And they don't have the drugs to come off slowly, which is a huge problem with antidepressants, but it's easy to get GP to antidepressants at you. No GP should be throwing antidepressants at you before they prescribe exercise and make sure you've done that exercise. And so that's the other side. That's the doing things side, the male way of things. It's like exercise is profoundly beneficial for one's mental health, profoundly beneficial. And so in my practice before I left the UK, which was called men's issues therapy, which is just men, all I dealt with was men, ironically, the gay guy, all straight men, right? And the therapy that we did was exclusively while walking. I mean, I've gone to the gym and I've lifted with guys. And I've gone to golf course and I've played golf with them while doing therapy. But most of it was walking, and exercise is profoundly beneficial for one's mental health. Because a lot of the things that plague us on a daily basis, we just need catharsis. We just need to get, we just need to vent it. And exhausting your body in exercise is a great way to do that. And this is also where I, as the distance runner, say, it's your safe space. So I tell my students, like, if you're a distance runner, and you're having a bad day, like don't go on a distance run. Like that's your reward. Talk it out. Do something.
Yeah.
Go on a run. And the other thing is like if you're suffering from anxiety, don't go on a run. Because if you're on a long, slow cardiovascular steady state, right, you just think about the problem over and over again. You hit the gym and push to the point of exhaustion. And once your muscles hit failure, trust me, I mean, I'm not telling you anything you don't know, and I don't think there's anybody in your audience that I'm telling they don't know. But when you're near the point of failure, right, and you're trying to get it up to the bar, you're not thinking about your anxiety. You're thinking about all your energy is going to that. What type of exercise will help reduce your mental stress and promote your vitality is hugely important. And your research, you found that CrossFit was this amazing hybrid activity that really worked well for vets with PTSD. And like, that's fantastic because yes, therapy is great and wonderful. And it's the feminine way of looking at it. And it does work and it has benefits, but so is exercise, which is more the male way of looking at it. But we need to tailor that exercise to the individual, depending on their circumstances. And that exercise should be like a prescription, right? It's like, okay, well, you may not benefit from this prescription, but you might benefit from that one. And so we need people like you, and personal trainers and people like Gary Turner and myself, although I'm not in the UK anymore. We need them to go, right, let's find out what your issues are and then prescribe an exercise modality for you. Many times that exercise modality, it's gonna require like the benefits of community, of team. So it's like, you need to join a group. You need to join an organization. Right? So go off and join the running group or go off and join the bowling group or the whatever to get that exercise.
Yeah.
Go to the gym and take a class as opposed to just go in there, load your headphones. Worst thing that ever happened in gym culture, people with headphones. Used to make friends. Oh, can you spot me? And now, it's like, oh, I'm going to the headphones in, their own silent private world, their own private gym. And so we've lost the social side of the gym for what it could be, which is a sense of community. So yes, mental health benefits dramatically from talking and from exercise. And James, if you were to ask me, if you were to say, Eric, you could only do one, I'm saying for men, it's exercise. Yeah. Exercise is more important than talk therapy. Now, I don't mean talking to your friends because we all need to socialize, otherwise it's isolation. I mean the actual paying for therapy, pay for the gym session instead, or a class, join a team.
Yeah. I mean, I totally agree. I think part of my journey being diagnosed with PTSD, I've always been in the fitness environment over 30 years of physical training, team sports. It's always been an avenue, but sometimes, you know, when you're suffering and in the darkest moments, doing the same thing is probably the wrong thing to do. Try a different avenue of exercise is definitely the way ahead, but you might not see that because your walls are closing in and you don't have the right advice. So actually having that social interaction and speaking to somebody can be that that bridge across from being in isolation to getting the help that you need. So I agree. One of my recommendations on my PhD was to prescribe physical training. And you can do it scaled. It doesn't have to be, all singing, all dancing, CrossFit. It could be anything from walking, yoga, anything that helps the individual in a safe environment. And that's biggest key as well. It's got to be safe and accessible to all. And any form of exercise is better than none.
Absolutely. In the final conclusion, I would say, look, masculinity took a rap for being hyper, right? And we've made great cultural progress. And now men can talk about their emotions. We need to facilitate that through role modeling, through groups, and we need to do that while moving. And that is what men need, to do this while moving, talking to their friends while jogging or in between lifts, etc., is fantastic. So we made tremendous progress. And then and this is the sort of the other big thing I wanted to hit you all up with was, it's like, okay, I'm just going to repeat myself real quick. Used to be men couldn't vote at all. They do fine. Now they can, right? So we've made great progress. Men now need to be able to move together and talk together, which is increasing. And men need therapy when they don't get those problems solved from just exercise with their friends. If exercise and talking to your friends is not working, then now's the time for some therapy, right? As long as it's not a disease like schizophrenia, because therapy is not going to help out. You need drugs for that. But if it's just the daily sort of depressions and lives and struggles and vulnerabilities that we have, relationship issues, etc., being with your friends and exercising and talking is not working. Now's the time for men to seek some therapy. Think it with a man. Think of the male. 93% of undergraduates in psychology programs who want to go on to be therapists are women. Yet 50% of the population is male. Now, some men might be like, I prefer to talk to a female. Then that's absolutely fine. But what I found in my practice was men were like, holy cow, men take a different approach to therapy. I feel so much more comfortable talking to a man about this. So many of the clients that I would get had been to previous therapists, and they said that they felt they were being judged by their therapists. And I'm like, because there's a lot of stigma against men, full stop. And so I really think that, James, that for me is the next big avenue that we need to cross. We need affirmative action in the psychological realm to get more men into therapy, because there's not enough of them and you do things differently. And I really, really believe that, and a lot of psychologists, they're going to post shit on this, but I think men understand men in a way that women just don't. And maybe the opposite side is also that maybe women will do better with female therapists, and that's perfectly fine. It's acceptable, right? We don't need to pretend that every psychologist is exactly the same, because we're not. Because they're not relating to those clients. They're not relating to their therapists based on professional qualifications. They're relating to on the character and the personality that comes across between those two. So that's kind of where I'd like to leave you at is, let's keep the exercise. Let's keep men in groups where they're able to make friends, and therefore those friends could turn bromances. Ideally, groups where you're not kicked out of. So sport is good, but it's not great because you get kicked out of it eventually. But these boot camps, I love to study those someday. Amazing. Everybody shows up, high energy music, running around, doing stuff. Not a lot of opportunity to talk to your friends, but hopefully go for a walk afterwards, that kind of thing. Make some friends there. Only CrossFit, all of these sort of things is great. And then when we do need therapists, which we should seek before antidepressants, because antidepressants don't work too well, we need more male therapists.
As always, what an exciting interaction. I always love speaking with you. I think our conversations are always very thought-provoking, controversial at times, challenging, but always worthwhile. And I always learn something every time we have a conversation. So thank you for sharing both your honest opinion, your research, and I'm sure the listeners will try and get hold of you and have a conversation with you about a lot of these topics. For anyone who's listening to this podcast, remember, strength isn't silence. If you or someone is struggling, please reach out, talk to a teammate, coach, a friend, and as Eric quite rightly said, reach out to a professional. Don't wait. Start the conversation today. That was trauma training and transformation. Please subscribe and leave a comment on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your podcasts, or follow me on my Substack on at Trauma Training Transformation and all your social media platforms, because breaking the silence is where healing begins. You've been listening to Trauma Training and Transformation. I'm Dr. Alder. Eric, again, thank you very much. And thank you, the listener, for joining us today. Until next time, keep moving, keep growing, and keep the conversation alive.